I managed to be simultaneously surprising and disappointing at my birth. And finally, the book that I found the most surprising in 2022 is, hello friends, it is time to drink some wine and be honest. Like that time that I asked my dad what he wanted to be and he said single. I'm really excited about this video because this is going to be a video that my Patreons voted. What? I'm super excited about this video because it was voted on by my beautiful patrons, and the topic of today is going to be books that I read in 2022 that were the most surprising, and I've decided to do a little bit of a spin on this video by including books that surprised me in a bad way. Okay, so we've got good surprises and we've got bad surprises. According to my father, I was a bad surprise, if you know what I'm saying. So I'm really excited to talk about this nice stack of 10 books here that surprised me in good ways and in bad. I have my good friend White Wine here to help me get through the day. Hi, hello. I'm on my second prescribed glass by my doctor. And without further ado, let us begin by talking about the Sunbearer Trials by Aiden Thomas, which was a surprise in a bad way. Now, I just want to say that this is a fantastic book. I do understand why it was so beloved, and I have an entire hour-long live show with myself and Nat of Something Bookish This Way Comes, where we discussed this book because it was the NB Book Club pick for December, and we talk about it at length. So that's going to be linked down below if you want to check it out. What is Akasha doing? Anyway, the reason that this was kind of a negative surprise is because everybody talks about Aiden Thomas's works like they are the absolute best thing besides the sun being born. I think that that is amazing. I love to see a Mexican trans author being hyped up so much. It just means that my expectations for this book were very high, and I want to state again that this is a good book. There's nothing wrong with the book, but I was expecting it to truly wow me, and let me mince no words, there is a lot of stellar things about this story. We are following a young 17-year-old trans boy named Theo who is a semidio, and he is kind of made to participate in these competitive trials that pick the new, I forget what the title is officially. I forget what it is, but to become the Sunbearer, or the Sunbearer Trials. I'm fucking crying. He ends up being kind of made to participate in what's called the Sunbearer Trials, and that is this trial where everybody competes. One person gets to have the title of Sunbearer and another person dies. It's not fun for everybody. This is what I'm saying. Not everybody's gonna survive the trial if you hear what I'm putting down. This is a really fantastic book because there are so many great conversations about transness, and I love the absolute phenomenal society that was built. I love the heavily leaning into on Mexican lore and mythology and spirituality. It was a truly amazing book. We had a great vast array of characters. There was a lot of banter, there were a lot of action, but unfortunately it just didn't have that same emotional impact on me that it did on so many of you. If I were 14, 15, 16, 17, hell, maybe even 19, this book would have hit me hard. But unfortunately, I think it's just a case of one of those books that I read a little too late, because the writing style for this is very young. It reads to me very comfortably as a middle grade novel. It's very hard for me to feel emotionally attached to novels that have that tone. They have a lot of pop culture references like Instagram, TikTok, etc. You know, they're not called that, but you know exactly what they're talking about. The whole voice of it was just a little bit too young for me to have that impact that I was hoping to have. And there are plenty of YA books that do give me that impact. Unfortunately, this just wasn't the right story for me, but it is something that I highly recommend. So it did surprise me that this book didn't make it onto my top 10 favorite list. I also am going to be talking about All the White Spaces by Ali Wilkes. This is also the NB Book Club pick for January. So we read Sunbearer Trials in December, and then we read this in January, and this is a reread for me. I read this in November. When I read it, I was like, no, we have to make this a book club pick. And if you're not familiar with my book club, it is a non-binary book club where we read books by non-binary authors, whether or not they have non-binary protagonists. This was a book that so changed me that I had to make it a pick. And the reason why it was so surprising is, where do I begin? Actually, where do I begin? I was so shocked that I was like, no, I'm using my executive authority and I am making this our January book club pick because everybody has to read it. And what's surprising about this is that the book itself does not seem like it is going to be so emotional and incredible, because you go into it expecting your typical, you know, snowed in, claustrophobic, polar mystery. Basically, you're following, so first of all, it's historical fiction. That's surprising, because I think it's pretty hard to write a historical fiction thriller and make that shit be actually scary.
What is scary about Queen Victoria?
What this book is about at its core is it is about this trans man who, his brothers are killed at war, and he wants to prove himself by sneaking onto this polar exhibition, I think to Antarctica in the year 1920. And he's like, if I can go and see the northern lights, I can live up to my brothers because they didn't think I could be an explorer, and I can do the thing that they always wanted to do, that sort of thing. And when they get onto this expedition, the entire team, they start being hunted by something that is using the aurora borealis lights to kill them, lure them out, and murder them one by one. And when I tell you that this book is so creepy and so visceral, I'm shook. I read a lot of horror and thrillers, and I watch a lot of horror and thriller movies. I consume a lot of horror, and a lot of the horror movies that I watch, I don't even talk about, because I'm like, how can I talk about this really brutal film that I just watched? So where I'm going with this is, it takes a lot to scare me, and the scenes in this book were effective. But not only that, it's a very emotional book. It talks so well about grief and identity and transness, but also just love and coming of age. And I know that that all sounds so wishy-washy, but it is truly phenomenal. The character work in this book alone is incredible, and I was shocked. I was shocked to be given a thriller horror book that had so much range, because it just was truly a breath of fresh air, and I could keep going on and on and on. I could talk about the amazing atmosphere of the writing. This author can write their ass off. I'm just telling you, the writing is unparalleled. It is so good. And I'm just like, how did you give us a book that has an awesome trans main character where you're dissecting gender identity and trans masculinity, and you're giving us horror, bone-chilling horror, and you're writing these beautiful landscapes and setting the scene so well? Like, how do you do this? How do you do this? I could talk all day about that, but I'm not going to, because instead I'm just going to direct you to the NB Book Club live show that we're going to be having featuring Gabby of Gabby Reads, and that's going to be linked down below. So RSVP to it if it doesn't come to pass by the time this video goes live, and if it has passed by the time this video goes live, it'll be in the description for you to watch either way. Next up, we have a negative surprise, and that was Woman of Light by Kali Fajardo Anstein, who gave us Sabrina and Corina. I love this book. I love this author so freaking much. She is a Mexican indigenous author who is very, very close to my heart. I loved Sabrina and Corina, this book of incredible short stories about indigenous Mexican women, and I thought that they were amazing, and her writing is so forceful. It is evocative and consuming, and I love the way that she writes about Mexican womanhood. She does so in ways that feel so completely and utterly, indescribably good. I was excited about Woman of Light because the synopsis alone set my body on fire. You're basically following these two siblings, one who is Diego, a snake charmer that falls in love with a white woman and a mob chases him out of town, and the other is a woman, and she is a seamstress or a laundress, and she is forced to defend for herself, not speaking English, in like the 50s, in 1930s Denver. Her name is Luz, and Luz has to deal with her spirituality, her visions, the loss of her culture and her tongue, and it's just such, the synopsis is everything that I would love. Unfortunately, I was bored to tears. I was bored to tears. I was very, very bored. It felt like I was at a history lesson. I didn't finish it. I couldn't finish it because I had no excitement for it. It definitely was a miss for me, a huge miss. I'm hoping to get my hands on the audiobook at some point. I think rereading it via audio would be a great thing for me, but that that shit was a hard pass
for me.
And next up, I'm gonna talk about The Price of Salt by Patricia Highsmith, which is also known as Carol. Now, this was a book that came in the Feminist Book Club subscription, my favorite book subscription box. And I was a little bit nervous about it because I saw Carol, the movie, and I was like, beautiful, 2 white women fall in love in like the 40s. Love that for them. Other than it just being like a really sweet story, I didn't really connect to it. I wasn't particularly moved. I wasn't super invested in their love. I just was rooting for them because they were 2 women who loved women. But in terms of actually feeling something, no. I loved that Nicholas Hoult was in the film. He's one of my favorite actors. I loved the cinematography and the scene composition. I loved so many things about the film, but not the film necessarily itself and the story. So I was like, reading the classic that inspired Carol, yes, I'm super interested in it, but I didn't think it would be a favorite. Now, this is one of the first books that I read in 2022. And I don't think I've spoken about it like at all, but it was quite good. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and then when I finished it, I was like, am I seriously giving this fucking book 5 out of 5 stars? I think that it absolutely lives up to the hype. I don't think that this cover is doing it any favors, and part of the reason why I found it so surprising was because, you know, at the start of the book, I was like, oh, this is pretty good. And then we get to the middle, and I'm like, it's good, but I don't know if it's gonna be, and then by the end of the book, the ending really makes it. It takes you for a ride. It makes you hate characters that you once loved, and it makes you frustrated, it makes you sad, and the ending. If you want a book that is not your typical queer tragedy, read this book, but one that still is gonna hit you in your feels, one that's going to give you those like fun, like Parisian vibes. I can't remember where this book is set. I think it's set in New York City, but there's still something very French about it all, about the fashion and the atmosphere of the book. I think that this is a really, really good read if you want to read something queer and classic, but be surprised by it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Another positive surprise was Bluebird by C.L. Tierlet. I was asked to read this book. I said yes, even though I rarely say yes to solicited books because you guys know that I'm really picky, and it's not that I'm a snob, it's just that I know what I like. And so when someone sends me, you know, a pitch to their book, I'm like, this is probably a great book, but I probably won't like it because I am such a picky reader, and I hate that about myself, but I am who I am. So this is one of those books though that the publisher reached out and was like, hey, you should check out this book, and I was like, I don't know about that. I read the synopsis and I was like,
okay, that actually kind of slaps.
It was honestly the cover that gave me the most pause. I was like, I don't know about her, but something told me to say yes to the dress. I said yes to the dress, and that dress was banging. This book is so shocking because I underestimated it, and that's my own fault. That's my bad.
Look who looks silly now.
This is a queer lesbian space opera. Say less, right? So we are following this girl named Rig, who is a gunslinger, outlaw, and a thief, and she and her ship Bluebird have been on the run ever since she stole these big plans that one of the factions that controls the galaxy wants. And so she's been on the run, and she ends up meeting this other outlaw whose name is What? I can't remember the name of the girl that she teams up with, but it's an unlikely ally situation, and the girl that she teams up with is an assassin, and she is badass. And Rig's girlfriend is a librarian, and she's got 2 guns that are actual characters in the books. Their names are Panache and Pizzazz, and it's just a lot of fun. It is nowhere near as cheesy as I was a little bit concerned it might be, and it was cheesy in just the best ways. The fight scenes were great, the world building was great, the social commentary was great, there was a really nice little sex scene in there just sprinkled in, there was a lot of chemistry and twists, and if you're looking for an underrated space opera, I think that you can really look no further. It was the perfect length as well for the story, and I am officially on board with this author. I can't wait to see what they write next. Next up, we have Don't Cry for Me by Daniel Black. I'm not gonna lie, this is a book that Book of the Month sent me, and I was convinced that I would hate it. I was utterly, completely, and totally convinced that this book would be one of the worst things that I had ever read, and I don't mean because of quality, I mean just because of who I am as a person. These kinds of synopsises do not do it for me. So if you're not familiar with Don't Cry for Me, this is a book about a man who is struggling with his own homophobia when his son, who is gay, dies, and he is writing letters to his dead gay son throughout the entire book basically apologizing for being, you know, a homophobic piece of shit. And this whole like trope of I didn't appreciate my queer kid when they were alive, but now that they're dead, I'm gonna regret my ways thing, that narrative doesn't work for me as a queer person. I think that that narrative is necessary and important for certain people, but I most definitely am not one of them. If this kind of book would be really good for people who are homophobic and need to work through that shit. These kinds of books don't necessarily feel like they're written for me as a queer person. That's why I was like, I just don't love this, I don't want to say trope, but yeah, this trope basically. The only reason why I didn't unhaul it immediately is because this is semi-autobiographical and it is from a Black queer author. And I was like, okay, that changes a lot of things. Obviously that changes a lot of things. But for me as a queer person, I just tend to not read those kinds of queer stories. Given all of my pause, right? I promise I did go into this with an open mind. I listened to it on audio. And I could not put this book down. I was coming up with excuses to get in my car because I wanted to hear more of the story. I loved it. It was incredibly moving. It was well written. It did what we were supposed to do. And I loved the commentary about Blackness and queerness at their intersections, especially with different schools of thought and with things that I don't want to say only older Black populations need to unlearn, because non-youthful Black populations have shit to unlearn as well. So much that I can say about this book. I could have a whole video on it. I just want to say that it did exceed my expectations. I think that this was a really beautiful story. You have to read the author's note, and I am happily going to be rereading it at some point. Next up, we have a disappointment, and that is Under the Udala Trees by Chinelo Okparanta. This is a book that I was expecting to be one of my new favorites of all times. I read this with my patrons, and a lot of us honestly did not love this book. I did annotate it quite a bit because the writing is beautiful. It is modern classic sapphic love story set in Nigeria. It leans very heavily into dialogue about war and class and queer oppression. It's one of those queer must-reads in my opinion. I am so glad that I read it, but the reason why I'm just so disappointed is how little I felt for it. And I think that it's just the author's writing style. She has this really beautiful writing style, but it made me feel very distant from the story and what was happening. So I could not connect in any way, shape, or form with the characters, which is weird because I normally don't necessarily need to connect, because if I'm able to lock into a story, even just on an intellectual level, I can still get a lot out of it and enjoy it, and I don't need to connect to a narrative. There's something in my heart that kept trying to make this story hit, make these lines that were so devastating hit, and these scenes, and they just didn't. I think that it is absolutely a me thing. I know that it is a me thing. This book is so heavily celebrated, and I co-sign all of that praise. It just didn't work for me, and I was so surprised to hear it. So I have her latest book on my TBR for Blackathon this month, and I'm so excited for it. Now, one of my positive surprises is The Honeys by Ryan LaSala. I did not like Reverie, which I hate to say. I feel like I'm betraying all of my brethren when I say that, but I just really did not like Reverie. I didn't like it because I just thought that it was a very strong debut, but that it read like a debut. And I had issues. I guess I shouldn't say that I didn't like it. There was a lot about the book that I did really enjoy. I gave it a 3-star, but the things that I disliked, I truly disliked. And because of that, I did not think I was going to enjoy The Honeys as much as I hoped that I would. Thankfully, we read this for my Patreon book club in November, or was it December? I can't remember. And I think all of us loved it. I think only one of us gave it 3 stars. I had such a freaking blast reading this book, annotating it. The audiobook is phenomenal. It has one of my favorite tropes, which is insect horror, and I loved it so deeply. It exceeded all of my expectations. Ryan LaSala did that. I will never ever doubt them again. He is a truly amazing storyteller, and what he did with the story, the twists, the turns, the pacing, all of that, just the character work, everything. The end of this book went places that I never could have imagined, and I'm so so impressed. When I finished the book, I felt stunned into silence. And I think I remember sitting and just thinking about everything that happened in the story and how impacted I was. It's truly, truly formidable. If you are a person who kind of steers away from YA, I think you should give this a try. I think you should jump out of your comfort zone, especially if you like horror, and give this a try. When I started reading the book, and I talk about this in the vlog, and I was like, why does everybody think that this book is so scary? It's not that. And then it hits a point and the horror really just pours in. So this is often compared to Midsommar, which I think is a perfect comparison. I think it's a perfect comparison. It is about this kid named Mars who is gender fluid, and he goes to this summer camp that his twin sister just came from and died, basically. And he goes there kind of seeking answers, and he gets indoctrinated into this group of girls called the Honeys. That's all I'm gonna say. Oh, so good. It's literally Bunny meets Midsommar meets Candyman. It's so good. My second to last surprisement. What? Surprisement, surprising disappointment. Surprisement, me when I was born. The Sympathizer. I thought that this was gonna be one of my top 10 books of the year. It's one of the books that I just bought because I had a feeling about her, and boy, was I wrong. This is a spy novel, and I love books about spies. I really do. It is my toxic trait. I do, especially with all of the social commentary that this book has about what it means to be a half French, half Vietnamese army captain who comes to America after the fall of Saigon. Obviously, there's gonna be a lot of social commentary in there, and this is very clearly a talented author, but I am bored. I'm really, really bored despite what happened with the squid.
We're not gonna talk about that.
I currently am on page 138, and this is a little bit of a spoiler for a video that I am going to be filming pretty soon. But if y'all remember, this was on my 5-star predictions of 2022 that I have to read or unhaul in 2022, and I did not make it. So since I had already started annotating it and I bought it brand new, it's in great condition actually, I figured I would finish annotating it and then just put it up on my pango. So I still will be unhauling it, and I'm still trying to get through this book. It's really fucking boring, that's all I gotta say. It's a big old snooze fest, and I'm very, very surprised because when I have an intuition about a book, I'm never wrong. It's weird for me to have an intuitive feeling about a book so strongly that I would just buy it and be this wrong about it, because y'all know buying books outright from authors that I haven't already read is not something that I do. It's not something that I do. But I'm excited to finish it. I'm still vlogging the very slow reading experience for that, and I will let y'all know how that turns out. And finally, the book that I found the most surprising in 2022 is The Hollow Kind by Andy Davidson. I have a 45-minute reading vlog, spoiler free, on this book. And those of y'all who saw the vlog already know what I'm about to say. This is the scariest book that I've ever read. And you guys know that I am fucked up from the ground up. So if I'm scared, something is scary. And I talk about in the vlog why this book was just tailored to my fears and what gets me. It's terrifying. It is terrifying. If you are scared of ghosts and creepy shit and curses, you have to read this book. And if you're one of those people who enjoys reading about that stuff, but you aren't necessarily scared by it, you have to read this book. I did find that it was the audiobook specifically that got me so terrified. For most of the vlog, I'm listening to it in audio form, which is why there's very little like annotation tabs. At the end of the book, I switched to the physical because I wanted to know if I would be as scared if I read it physically than if I read it audibly. And it turns out that no, it's definitely the audiobook. So if you are able to access and enjoy audiobooks, do it for this. And so this is a story where we are following a mother and a son who is trying to escape their abusive father, and they flee to this farm.
Who is calling me?
We're just gonna ignore that. It's probably a bill collector.
I don't have what you want.
And the farm is cursed. It's terrifying. It's terrifying. You just gotta watch the vlog. That's gonna do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and more importantly to my patrons for voting for this video. All my social media links are down below, and I'm excited to see you in my next one.